public hearing to order. The procedures are we will have the call of the public hearing, and then I will ask Mr. Steve to give the presentation of the proposed ordinance, and we will hear public comment. We will adjourn, and then the item will be discussed during the regular town council meeting. So Roxanne, could you state the call of the meeting?
The Ledyard Town Council will conduct a public hearing at 6:15 p.m. on Wednesday, September 12, 2012, in the council chambers, Town Hall Annex 741 Colonel Ledyard Highway, Ledyard, Connecticut, to receive comment on the proposed an ordinance for the abatement of property taxes for low or moderate income persons. At this hearing, interested persons may appear and be heard, and written communications will be accepted. Copies of the draft ordinance are available in the town clerk's office during regular business hours. This was dated at Ledyard, Connecticut on the 29th day of August 2012 for the Ledyard Town Council. Linda C. Davis, Chairman. It was published in the New London Day on September the 3rd, 2012.
Something that I observed, and I'm not sure if it's important at this time, but it's actually an ordinance for the abatement of property taxes for housing for lower and moderate income persons, not for low or moderate income persons, and that's significantly different. So
yes.
You will point that out if you would
Yes.
go ahead forward on the presentation.
Yes, I am Mr. Steve.
Mr. Steve.
You changed your name. That's what I was called.
I called it.
For anyone who is here to talk about the actual abatement, this is not it. This is only an ordinance allowing us to provide an abatement. It's a short ordinance, it's only 2 pages, and that's all it does is allow the town to permit abatements for housing, taxes for housing for low or moderate income persons. So again, that's all this ordinance does is let the town consider and provide abatements. This is not an abatement. Anyone have any questions?
Or any public comments at this time?
If that is correct, I was curious as to why this...
Could you come to the...
Eric Treaster? I'm assuming that's correct, but I was curious as to why in the additional materials for the public hearing there is a draft contract with a proposed 64-unit apartment complex.
There is in the works a proposed abatement, but that has not been voted on. It has not been forwarded yet. All this ordinance does is allow us to consider the upcoming abatement.
I would say that it's there for informational purposes.
Yeah.
That was the reason it was there.
The tax abatement that's shown as being that the informational stuff is what was the impetus that drove creating this ordinance. It was based upon the state statute. We have to have an ordinance that allows us to provide the abatement.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments, Mr. Cherry?
Good evening, Mike Cherry, 5 Whippoorwill Drive, Chairman of the Planning Commission. And if we page down a little bit further, this first time I heard of this was when former Councilor Dave Holdridge brought it to our attention, the economic development, the development they were looking for.
What section are you in, Mike? I can't see that.
I'm in Section 2, eligibility, such tax abatement shall be used for.
Okay.
And the project itself, at that time, we didn't have any details on what we might do for tax abatements or whether they would need them. We said, well, we would entertain it, and economic development would be happy to champion that in front of the council. The next time they came back with these 3 items on what the abatement could be used for. And what a noble purpose. We're going to give a tax abatement so that they can reduce the rent below the levels that they could if they had to pay the taxes. I like that much better than they reduce the rent so somebody can make more profit, or they reduce the rent so they can change the color of the paint. This actually helps the people that this type of development would be directed towards. And I've heard nothing but comments in favor of this, both from economic development and planning, and strongly endorse this ordinance because it will enable us to move forward in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes, Mr. Treaster.
Eric Treaster. As some of you know, I look at things under a microscope and I try to get as precise as possible. And I see some areas that perhaps should justify some additional attention. On the proposed ordinance, this gives the town the ability to abate I believe the ordinance should be clarified so that the way this ordinance is worded is you have a choice of either abating or not abating, but it does not permit a 50% abatement, or what the eventual applicant for the 64-unit housing complex is asking for, which is a 75% abatement. My reading of the statute is that it's either 0 or 100% abatement of taxes. The second is that in the authorization pursuant to the authority granted in Section 8-215 of Connecticut General Statutes, a program is hereby established under which property taxes will be abated, which means 100% abated in my mind, on housing solely for low or moderate income persons or families or disabled persons. The statute does not say disabled persons. And I'm not sure if this ordinance should say disabled persons. If it's an income-based ordinance, then whether they're disabled or not disabled makes no difference. But the way it's worded is you could have somebody making $1 million a year who's disabled, and they would be entitled to the abatement. Under eligibility, properties eligible for this abatement are affordable housing as defined in Section 8-39 of the Connecticut General Statutes. 839 is housing, affordable housing in 839 is defined as the median income, where 30% of the median income is available for housing. The median income in Ledyard is a mind-boggling almost $84,000, which means that the amount of money available for housing is in excess of $24,000. That's a lot of money for housing. People have a negative opinion of affordable housing as defined by 839A, but it's really not bad. You can buy houses, you can rent really nice things for that. So the way this ordinance is worded is you are abating taxes either for the developer or pass through in the form of reduced rent for people who have as much as $24,000 for a family and $24,000 available for the family for housing costs. And I'm not sure that that's a fair use of subsidies, because this is really a subsidy to the developer for the taxpayers of Ledyard. You also use the term in that first paragraph, and limit use of the property to occupancy by elderly residents. Elderly is not defined. Is elderly over 50, 55, 60, 90, 100? What is the definition of elderly? And once you get into that universe, you're bumping into the fair housing laws, and where either 80% of the units have to be for people who are 55 or older, or 100% of the units have to be for people who are 62 years of age and older. But the term elderly is a red flag in the universe of fair housing because it's not defined. It references, the next sentence is elderly residents who meet the requirements within families or low to moderate income as defined by Section 839E and 839F. I brought a copy of those two statutes. And E is families of low income, means families who lack the amount of income which is necessary as determined by the authority undertaking the housing project. That means the town has no say-so on this. Determined by the authority undertaking the housing development project. I assume that means the developer, but it's not clear in the ordinance. I believe that the town should have a say-so as to the definition of what families of low income means. In F, 839 F, families of low and moderate, it has a different definition. Families of low and moderate income means families who lack the amount of income which is necessary as determined by the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development to enable them to rent or purchase moderate cost housing without financial assistance as provided by this part in parts 2 and 3 of this chapter. I'm not, again, it's not, I think that this ordinance could be changed so that the town has more control over who we want this housing to be for. I urge caution. The proposal has the best of intentions, and I do not disagree with these intentions, but I believe that taxpayer dollars should be carefully used. And for those who have been around for a long time, New London's decline, started with good intentions by providing affordable housing. And we need, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying let's control this thing. We can do better on this ordinance. The next issue is 839A is the definition of affordable housing, but 830G is the statute that gave Mark Cohen the authority to build his 3-family in a residential district, and it gave the authority of the owner of Stonegate Village to request the removal of the age restriction, and either one might prevail. 830G is 830G. If the town is subject to an 830G application, zoning goes out the window. It turns out that any development that complies with 830G automatically complies with 839A. The advantage of now 830G, the easiest way to satisfy an 830G requirement, affordable housing requirement, as used in 830G, is for the housing cost to be affordable with 30% of 80% of the median income for one half of the units, and 30% of 60% of the median income for the other half of the units that are affordable. Because 830G automatically satisfies the definition of 839A, by changing this ordinance and making 100% of the proposed units to be developed affordable for people who make 80% of the median income, and 50% of the units affordable for people who make 80% of the median income, and 50% of the units affordable for people who make 60% of the median income, where 30% of that remaining number is for housing. We have knocked off 60 for the proposed developments coming up. We have credited the town with 62 credits towards satisfying the goals of 830G. The goal of 830G is 10% of the town's housing is deed restricted for 40 years at 60% and 80% of the median income, where 30% of those numbers will pay for the housing. Or subsidized rent, or financed by Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Okay? It would be a minor change to this ordinance, and it would not impact the developer one iota if the town required that he satisfy both 839A and, not or, but and 830G by making all of the units, all of his units, conform with the affordable for people, half of the units at 60%, half of the units at 80% of the median income, where 30% of those numbers are for housing. We are currently at about someplace in the neighborhood of 5.7% or so towards our 10% goal before we are becoming immune to an 830G application. 62 would probably bring that up to about 8.5%. That's the most important comment, by the way. There are some other technical issues on the ordinance. Such tax abatement shall be used for one or more of the following purposes: to reduce rents below the levels which would be achieved in the absence of such abatement. Sounds good. However, our zoning regulations were amended just for this type of application. And one of the amendments that we included was to reduce the minimum size of the square footage to 540 square feet for a one-bedroom apartment. And the reason for that was so that federal financing would become available. In addition to that, we reduced the amount of parking that's normally required. The technical argument was because older people don't need as much parking. But one of the reasons that was not stated on the record, but I believe to be valid, is because it lowers the development costs for the project, which would be amortized to each of the units. A 540 square foot apartment, over at Fox Rent Apartments, you can rent a 2-bedroom apartment, which would be larger than 750 square feet, for about $800 a month. A 540 square foot 1-bedroom apartment, market rate rents will be less than $600 a month. The proposal in the contract for a 75% reduction in the property taxes, assuming that the property taxes are in the neighborhood of $2,000 per unit, that turns out to be someplace in the neighborhood of $100 reduction in the rent per unit. So we're going from about $600 or $650 or $550 down to maybe $450, $500, something like that. Are we sure that we want? Only the council can make this decision. But is the council confident that it wants to increase everybody else's taxes a little bit to provide for a $100 a month reduction in the rent for a selected group of residents who we will probably attract out of New London? New London has no housing at any price, subsidized or not, that's new. And I'm not sure if we should be subsidizing that. It's just something that the council will have to discuss.
Are you almost ready to finish up, wrap
Yes.
up? Thank you.
You did that to me before.
We have a limited amount of time.
Now, it also talks about to improve, the reduction in abatement can also be used to improve the quality and design of such housing. That's an interesting question because building codes determine the safety and health issues. And I'm not sure how that will improve quality and design. Another technical issue is this ordinance says reduce the rent. That's the purpose of the tax abatement. But that could be satisfied with a $1 a month reduction in the rent. We might want to propose a minimum of a 25% reduction in the rent, some fixed number to make it a meaningful exercise. Make sure the taxpayers are getting their money's worth. If you do talk about and I'm not saying you will, but because it was in the package, the draft contract, the property tax agreement, talks about
Teresa, we're not going to be talking
talks about 64 units. The 64 units is a violation of the zoning regs.
We're not going there.
Right. But just be aware that their proposal is an automatic violation of the zoning regs.
Eric, you should have recorded all of that for when we actually talk about the abatement. Paragraph 3 of Section 2 says that the abatement shall be made pursuant to a contract between the municipality and the owner of the housing. This is a catch-all ordinance.
I understand.
All of those details, all of those finer points under your microscope will be covered in the abatement, or should be covered in the actual abatement. So make all of those points when we get to the actual abatement. We don't want to make this specific to any abatement.
Right. There's also if you take an expansive interpretation of the ordinance, a person who owns his home, who makes the median income in Ledyard, could transfer ownership of his home into an LLC, and he could then rent the home from his LLC, and he would be entitled to an abatement on his taxes.
Actually, no, he'd be entitled to apply for an abatement, not get. This
But you have to-
ordinance does not grant an abatement to anybody.
I would like to call for other comments from the public, please.
Persons.
Are there any other comments from the public? Thank you. Mr. Holdridge.
Dave Holdridge, 29 Churchill Road. I wanted to speak in favor of the ordinance. I think there's evidence that there's need for more senior housing in Ledyard. And this was evidenced by the report that was done, the Burr's report, Affordable Housing Strategies, done in 2009. And in that study, they took census data and various demographic trends. And it was said that in Ledyard, the over 75 age group is expected to increase 62% by 2018. That is from 2009 to 2018. The over 75 age group is expected to increase 62%. That is together with the reasoning that they give for affordable housing for seniors is that an aging population alters the housing needs of the community. While this population strives to live independently or fixed incomes, they are forced to endure higher taxes, higher housing prices, maintenance costs, and medical expenses. Older persons have different lifestyle and health needs and may be difficult to satisfy in their existing homes. Senior residents who must live within their retirement savings may find it financially difficult to keep their home. They conclude saying that without the availability of affordable housing options for seniors, residents ages 75 and older will be priced out of the housing market in Ledyard. As the fastest growing population group is seniors, and this is a financially constrained group, we may conclude that housing for seniors is the most urgent housing need in Ledyard, according to the LaBerge group. Now, in terms of whether or not the people of Ledyard would be applying for this kind of affordable housing, there was a survey done by our church, the Ledyard Congregational Church, and we found that the people who are looking for senior housing or now or in the near future, 59% have incomes less than $40,000 per year, which is the population of low and moderate income people that our project is targeting. That is the church project. So the people are already here in Ledyard who could fill this kind of need. You don't have to look for people from the Ledyard. Anyway, there's a couple of specific comments that I wanted to make about the ordinance, the proposed ordinance. In the section 2, where in the third line, where it says property to occupancy by elderly residents, I think we ought to insert in there or disabled persons, because the federal statutes and grant lines all speak of elderly residents or disabled persons. And another thing is in section 3, it's hard for me to understand how this applies here, having to do with the appraisals. It says that applicants should submit certified appraisals with and without development rights that are to be conveyed to the town. Actually, in this affordable housing, developers wouldn't be proposing to convey anything
I think this, or any development rights, I think this language actually looks familiar to me, because I think it's the language that we used when we were doing a conservation abatement, conservation. And maybe that was carried over inadvertently. Anyway, I don't think that Section 3 really is needed. Anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Dave, I'm all set. Kevin, if I'm not mistaken, in Section 1, the modifier low or moderate income persons carries across, for low or moderate income, carries across to persons, families, and disabled persons. So we're not talking about a disabled person who has $1 million income. No, I don't believe. So it's those three groups within the low or moderate income bracket.
That's the intent of the ordinance, yes.
Okay. That could maybe be a little more clear.
I would argue that that's not what the ordinance says. I think the intent of the ordinance, but that's not what the ordinance says.
Correct. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying.
So we can clarify that when we discuss it under the town council. Any other public comments? Hearing none and without objection, this public hearing is adjourned.